Okay, thank you very much. This is big stuff.
I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop war.
On this channel, we usually talk about cyber criminals and hackers, but today's story is special. Today, I'm going to tell you about the world's biggest drug trafficker, the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, a man who held on to power for decades, turning an entire country into a tool for his dirty business. You'll hear the shocking facts, what the Cartel of the Suns is, and how it spread its tentacles across Latin America, how a head of state personally ran drug deals while hiding behind diplomatic immunity, how his regime finally fell, and the key role played by oil, Venezuela's greatest wealth and its biggest curse. This is a story of high-level corruption, the betrayal of a nation, and how the international community looked the other way for years. Grab some tea, get your popcorn. This is going to be interesting. Greetings, I'm Jin. Like and subscribe. Things are about to get interesting. Nicolas Maduro was just an ordinary bus driver from a poor neighborhood in Caracas who decided that politics was his way to the top. In the 1980s, a young Maduro joined a leftist movement and quickly learned the main rule of Venezuelan politics. To survive, you need a patron. He found one in Hugo Chavez, the charismatic military man who became president in 1999 and started the so-called Bolivarian Revolution. In the archival footage, we see an awkward Maduro next to the expressive Chavez. I think Maduro turned out to be the perfect subordinate. He didn't outshine Chavez, didn't crave fame, but was absolutely loyal. While other allies fought for influence, Maduro quietly climbed the career ladder. Congressman, Speaker of Parliament, Foreign Minister, Vice President. Chavez built a cult of personality, handed out oil money to the people, and called himself a 21st century socialist. Venezuela was drowning in oil dollars. Prices for black gold were hitting records, and it seemed the prosperity would last forever. But behind the facade of social programs, corruption was growing. The economy became dependent on a single resource, and democratic institutions were slowly rotting away. In 2012, Chavez was diagnosed with cancer. The disease progressed fast, and the comandante knew he needed a successor. He chose Maduro, clueless, unpopular, but the most submissive. A man who wouldn't betray the legacy and would keep the system running. On March 5, 2013, Hugo Chavez died. The country went into mourning, and Nicolas Maduro, this plain man with a mustache, suddenly found himself at the helm of one of the richest oil nations on earth. In the April 2013 election, he won by a tiny margin, just 1.5%. The opposition screamed fraud, but Maduro didn't care. He had the power. And now the main question wasn't how to get it, but how to keep it at any cost. Maduro inherited more than just a presidency. He got an entire system of power built by Chavez. The army, the secret service, the courts, the election commission. Everything was under the control of the Chavistas. But there was one problem. Maduro didn't have Chavez's charisma. The people didn't love him. The opposition wasn't afraid of him, and oil prices started to drop. The honeymoon ended quickly, and the new president had to show what he was truly capable of. In his first months in power, Maduro tried to play the role of the revolution's heir, mimicking Chavez's gestures and speeches. He even claimed that the spirit of the comandante appeared to him in the form of a small bird and gave him advice. People laughed, but the laughter died down fast. Because behind the comical appearance was a man ready to do anything for power. And very soon, Venezuela would find out just how far he was willing to go. The bus driver became president, but ahead of him was a transformation from a politician to a dictator, and from a dictator to a drug lord. A story that will shock everyone. 2014 was the turning point. Students took to the streets in peaceful protests against rising prices and crime. Maduro's response was brutal. The police opened fire. Dozens dead, hundreds wounded, thousands arrested. It was the first test of strength, and Maduro passed. He showed he was ready to drown protests in blood. But the real disaster was just beginning. Oil prices crashed from $100 a barrel to $30. Venezuela's economy, which produced nothing but oil, started falling apart like an avalanche. Inflation skyrocketed to astronomical figures, thousands, then tens of thousands of percent per year. Money turned into scrap paper. Grocery stores ran out of food. People stood in lines for hours for bread and toilet paper. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Patients died from illnesses that are treated with simple aspirin. Hunger came to the country with the largest oil reserves on the planet. Venezuelans started eating dogs, cats, and pigeons. People lost weight so fast that the term the Maduro diet was born. But instead of reforms, the president chose repression. Opposition leaders were thrown into prison one by one on fake charges. Leopoldo Lopez for inciting violence. Antonio Ledesma for a conspiracy. Maria Corina Machado was banned from holding office. In 2017, protests flared up again. 4 months of street battles, 163 dead. Maduro responded by creating the Constituent Assembly, a parallel parliament with unlimited powers that stripped authority from the legally elected National Assembly, where the opposition dominated. The secret services turned into a terror machine. Sabine and FAES, militarized units, burst into homes at night, tortured detainees, and made dissenters disappear. Venezuela became an open-air prison. By 2019, more than 5 million people had fled the country, the largest migration crisis in Latin American history. But Maduro held on. The army, police, and judges were all paid in dollars while the people starved. The repressive machine worked perfectly. And all this time, while the country was sinking into chaos, Maduro was building another business. A business that would bring him billions and make him America's enemy #1. These years of suffering would eventually become the main charges when Maduro finally ended up in a US prison. Maduro turned elections into a farce. In 2018, he held a presidential election where the main opposition candidates weren't allowed to run. International observers refused to recognize the results. Turnout was record low, but that didn't stop Maduro from declaring victory with 68% of the vote. When the head of parliament, Juan Guaido, declared himself interim president in 2019, he was recognized by over 50 countries, including the US and the EU. But Maduro didn't blink. He had the army, the secret service, and something even more valuable: drug money. When the oil money ran out, Maduro faced a problem: how to keep the army loyal. The generals weren't going to be satisfied with worthless bolivars. They needed dollars. So the president found a solution. He turned the Venezuelan armed forces into the largest narco-empire in Latin America. This is how the Cartel de los Soles, Cartel of the Suns, was born, named after the sun symbols on the epaulets of Venezuelan generals. This wasn't a typical criminal gang. It was an entire state-run drug trafficking system where defense ministers coordinated shipments, generals controlled routes, and military bases became transit hubs for cocaine. The scheme was simple and effective. The Colombian cartels FARC and ELN produced cocaine in the jungles near the border. Venezuelan soldiers provided a safe corridor through their territory. The cargo was loaded onto planes and ships directly at military facilities. Diplomatic flights, government vessels, everything was used to move drugs to Central America, Mexico, and then to the USA. According to US intelligence, up to 250 tons of cocaine passed through Venezuela every year. This brought in billions of dollars. Maduro personally oversaw the operations, and his inner circle got a cut of every shipment. First Lady Cilia Flores, Vice President Tarek El Aissami, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez, everyone was part of the machine. The Venezuelan military didn't just let the drugs pass. They actively collaborated with Colombian militants. They provided weapons, shelter, and medical help. Venezuela became a safe haven for narco-terrorists being chased in Colombia. In 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice filed charges against Maduro and 14 high-ranking officials. The charges included narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine, and weapons possession. A $25 million reward was placed on Maduro's head, an unprecedented amount for a sitting head of state, and it was later raised to $50 million. Nicolas Maduro became the most expensive wanted criminal in history. But Maduro felt untouchable. He was the president of a sovereign country with diplomatic immunity. Russia, China, and Cuba stood behind him. The Venezuelan army, fueled by narco dollars, was totally loyal. The Cartel of the Suns turned an entire nation into a criminal organization. Venezuela stopped being a country. It became the world's largest drug transit zone, run by a man in a business suit. Narco money flowed like water, but the people of Venezuela continued to starve. While generals built mansions and bought yachts, the country had no electricity or water. The irony was cruel. The government made billions from cocaine that destroyed US cities, but couldn't provide its own citizens with bread. Maduro created a narco-state where the military elite swam in dollars, while ordinary Venezuelans dug through trash cans. This wasn't just corruption, it was the betrayal of a nation on an industrial scale, and the world could no longer ignore it. January 3rd, 2026. Deep in the night. The Fuerte Tiuna military base in Caracas is silent. Nicolas Maduro is sleeping in his fortified residence next to his wife, Cilia Flores, with no idea that his time is up. In the sky over Venezuela, American helicopters are already flying. The operation was planned for months in total secrecy. After Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, U.S. policy toward Venezuela changed radically. Trump declared the Cartel de los Soles a foreign terrorist organization. The reward for Maduro jumped from $15 million to $50 million. But the U.S. president wanted more. He wanted the narco boss himself in handcuffs. Delta Force got the green light. The elite soldiers who took out bin Laden and al-Baghdadi were now flying to get the president of a sovereign state. It was an unprecedented move that broke all norms of international law. But for Washington, Maduro had long stopped being a legitimate leader. He was the head of a narco-terrorist organization. The helicopters landed right on the base. The security was neutralized in minutes, either bribed in advance or just too slow to react. Special forces burst into the dictator's bedroom. Maduro and his wife were detained right in their bed. No resistance, no heroic defense. The bus driver, who became a narco kingpin, surrendered without a single shot. An hour later, the prisoners were taken to the USS Iwo Jima in the Caribbean. From there, a direct flight to New York, where federal prosecutors were waiting with an indictment hundreds of pages long. Narco-terrorism, money laundering, crimes against humanity. Venezuela woke up in shock. Power passed to Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who declared a state of emergency. Russia called the operation an act of aggression and demanded Maduro's release. China expressed deep concern, but it was already too late. Secretary of State Marco Rubio issued a statement. Maduro is not a president. He is the leader of a drug cartel that held an entire country hostage. Today, justice has prevailed. The man who ruled the country as his personal property for 13 years, turning oil wealth into a narco-empire, was now sitting in a U.S. prison. Maduro's regime fell in a single night. Venezuela got a chance for a new beginning. This is a victory for the USA and for Trump personally.